So, we had discussed radiation pressure in the last class, and basically, if you consider radiation as a stream of photons and they are incident on a certain surface, then it is similar to gas particles impinging on the wall of the container, and just like gas particles exert a pressure on the walls of the container, similarly we can imagine that radiation will also exert a pressure on the wall of the uh, not container but wherever it is, whichever surface it is incident on. Okay, we consider two kinds of incidence, normal incidence and oblique incidence, and we saw that for normal incidence the radiation pressure comes out to be equal to the energy density. Okay, so for normal incidence, radiation pressure or pressure of radiation has the same value as that of energy density. However, when we considered oblique incidence or diffused radiation, that is, I mean, normal incidence is only a special case. But if you consider the general case, then radiation may be incident on a surface from any angle, making any angle to the normal to the surface. Normal incidence, as you know, in any case, reflection, refraction, etc. Normal incidence is a special case. But the general case is that the incident rays make a certain angle with the normal to the surface. So if we consider that surface to be theta, then we derived relation that the component of the momentum along the normal is u cos square theta, and therefore pressure of radiation on a surface for oblique incidence is u cos square theta. Now this theta is a certain value of the inclination of the incident ray that we have considered, and if you again further generalize this, so first step of generalization is that we move on from normal to oblique. For oblique, we consider one certain angle of that the incident beam makes with the normal to the surface, and that is theta, and we see that the pressure of radiation for oblique incidence at an angle theta to the normal to the surface is u cos square theta. But theta can have any value. So this is the next step of generalization, that this value of theta can range, it's not fixed. If you consider a surface, then radiation is incident on it from all directions. So you have to consider several values of theta to consider the total, to calculate the total pressure of radiation on a given surface. And so you have to make a summation u cos square theta, and our next step was to evaluate this summation. And for doing that, we considered a hemisphere, the base of which was lying on the surface on which the radiation is incident, and we have to consider all the rays that are coming through this hemisphere in order to consider all possible directions and incident on the surface AB. Okay, so for doing that, we divided the hemisphere into thin slices of discs in this manner. The lower disc is making a semi-vertical angle theta, and the upper disc theta plus d theta. And so again we did this calculation to find that the number of beams crossing the area of such a ring is given by n sine theta d theta, so that the fraction of beams lying between two arbitrary angles theta and theta plus d theta is dn by n equal to sine theta d theta. So the pressure due to these beams, that is dP, since for one set of beams at an angle theta, the pressure is u cos square theta. So the pressure for a fraction of for a number of beams, or the fraction of beams contained between a general set of angles theta and theta plus d theta, is dn by n multiplied by a single theta u cos square theta. Okay, so it is dp is u cos square theta into sine theta d theta. So obviously from the figure it is clear that we have to integrate in order to get the total pressure P. We have to integrate this expression from the minimum to the maximum value of theta, and as you can see for a hemisphere the minimum value of theta is 0 and the maximum value of theta is 90 degree or pi by 2. So when we do that integration, see that the pressure of diffuse radiation or obliquely incident radiation is 1/3 of the total energy density. Okay? So the pressure of the pressure of normal incidence is simply the energy density U, whereas the pressure of oblique incidence is 1/3 of the energy density. All right. So this is up to which we did, and we have to keep this in mind because we are going to require this in some derivations that we do later on. We also discussed just the statement of Stefan-Boltzmann law, and I told you that Stefan's law, which we know as it was given by Stefan in 1879. Okay, but later on it was modified by Boltzmann, and the final form that we know now, that we use now, was given in 1884. So what was this modification? When Stefan said that the rate of emission is proportional to the fourth power of the absolute temperature, so that we can write capital E equal to sigma T to the power 4, where sigma is called Stefan's constant, being a universal constant of this given value. It's a constant that is well used, and we almost know the value like we know the value of Boltzmann constant or Planck's constant, okay, or capital G. It's a universal constant. Now this law is strictly for a single object raised to a temperature T. Okay, it does not consider the exchange of heat that this object undergoes with its neighboring objects. But from the discussion of our two previous classes, you must be knowing now, and obviously you knew this earlier too, that heat emission from a body is not a singular phenomena. It's basically an exchange process. So if there are n number of objects in a room and you consider any ith object among these n number of objects, then this ith object absorbs heat from some of the n objects and emits heat to the rest of the n objects, depending on the temperature difference. For all the objects that are at a lower temperature than this ith object, it gives out heat, and for all the objects that are at a higher temperature from this object, it absorbs heat. So the net amount of heat that is either radiated from an object or absorbed by an object is the algebraic sum of all these heat exchanges. Okay, and this is also given by Prevost's theory of heat exchanges. So just because it is say a cold winter morning, we cannot say that we will always, give out heat and feel cold, because depends whether you are sitting by a fire or you are sitting in a cold room. So it totally depends on your neighbors too, whether you are going to emit heat or absorb heat. Okay, but this was not taken into consideration when Stefan was stating his law. But this was later on taken into consideration by Boltzmann, where he also considered the temperature of the surroundings at T naught, and the general statement was thus: the emission, the rate of loss of energy per unit area of the surface, is proportional not just to T to the power 4, but to T to the power 4 minus T naught to the power 4, where T naught is the temperature of a neighbor or neighbors. Okay. So we write the law in this manner: E equal to sigma T to the power 4 minus T naught to the power 4. But this is for a perfectly black body, where the object that is radiating heat is black, perfectly black, and the neighboring objects are also perfectly black. Okay, so capital T and capital T naught are temperatures of black bodies. What will happen if you consider non-perfect black bodies? Because most of the objects that we see around us are not perfectly black bodies. We all radiate heat and we all absorb heat, but not like a perfectly black body. So what will happen for these objects, these general objects? We add a multiplicative factor called epsilon or small e, where E is called the emittance. Okay. Now obviously you can see from here that for a perfectly black body the value of emittance small e is 1, and for all objects that we see around us that are not perfect black bodies, the value of emittance is anything between 0 and 1. Something which is a very good absorber and therefore a very good emitter will have a value of E which is a value close to 1, that is a high value fraction, whereas if something is not a good emitter and therefore not a good absorber, or the other way around, not a good absorber and therefore not a good emitter, then its value is close to 0, and any body will have emittance between 0 and 1. So when we are considering non-perfect black bodies, then instead of just writing capital E equal to sigma T to the power 4 minus T0 to the power 4, we write capital E equal to E into small e into sigma T to the power 4 minus T0 to the power 4. Clear? So we did up to here. Now what we'll do is we'll prove Stefan's law from a thermodynamical proof of Stefan's law, from a thermodynamical point of view. Okay? You might think that why thermodynamical point of view? Because we are considering radiation and radiation is an electromagnetic wave. So how do we, and Stefan's law is also related to radiation. Of course, temperature is there because we know that black bodies, the radiation from black bodies are totally dependent on temperature. So we might, you might have this question, but we will, as I told you in the beginning of this module, that we are going to discuss things that you already have studied about, but in this semester our discussion is going to be from a thermodynamical and a statistical point of view. Okay, so our point of view will become different. Now, how thermodynamically we will prove Stefan's law? We just saw that thermal radiation exerts pressure like a gas, right? For normal incidence, the pressure is U, the energy density, whereas for oblique incidence, the pressure becomes U by 3. If now this is almost, as I told you, like gas particles exerting pressure on the walls of the container. So if the pressure, if there is, and you know that when gas particles exert pressure on the container, walls of the container, the value is again rho by 3. It's 1/3 rho, right? So it's you can draw an analogy between the two, and therefore, just like relations of thermodynamics are valid for gases, gas particles, similarly for radiation too, the relations of thermodynamics are applicable. Okay, so it is using that analogy that we are going to apply thermodynamics to prove Stefan's law. Now let us consider an enclosure which is at uniform temperature T, pressure P and volume V. Just like we do in thermodynamics, any enclosure, we first have to state the initial parameters P, V and T, pressure, volume, temperature, and we consider that they are all at having uniform values for a given enclosure. Okay. Now let us suppose that the energy density of radiation inside this enclosure is small e, energy density. So for oblique incidence, pressure will be equal to small e. Now we all know our first law of thermodynamics, dq equal to du plus p dv. So, and we also recall the second thermodynamical relation. Remember the four Maxwell's relations for thermodynamics. So, the second thermodynamical relation, del Q del V T equal to T del P del T V. Now, in this case, I would like to point out one more thing, that each thing that you go through in a particular semester, remember that it will have some use, if not the entire syllabus, but some parts of it will have some use in the following semester or semesters to come. Okay, so which is why I always have been telling you from the beginning of this extraordinary pandemic situation when we were having online classes, that please don't ignore the study part. Okay, don't stop studying, because the concept building is very important if you want to understand things. For example, if you have skipped thermodynamics, or if you have just copied from somebody or something during your exam where you were supposed to have thermodynamics, then you don't recall any of this, the first law of thermodynamics or the second thermodynamical relation. But you know, this was done in detail this was there in your syllabus in detail in one particular semester, and so it is not possible for anyone to do it again. So if you don't remember, then you have to go through it by turning the pages. Okay, so basically second thermodynamical relation gives that del Q del V at constant T equal to T del P del T at constant V. Now, in place of dq del Q or dq, we write the first law of thermodynamics, because dq equal to du plus p dv. So, we write, since this is a partial derivative, we write del u plus p del v by del v t equal to t del p del t v. All right. Now, this left hand side here, you can see that only del u del v t remains from the first term, and from the second term we just have p. P del v means just p. So we take p to the right hand side and we can write del u del v t equal to t del p del t v minus p. Okay. Once again, I keep repeating this, that just listening to me over here on this and looking at the screen, you will not be able to figure out whether you are understanding, because you have to write and practice. Otherwise, there is no way out. So V is the volume of the enclosure, and therefore the total energy U should be equal to energy density multiplied by capital V, because small u is energy density, means energy per unit volume. So the total energy of the volume capital V is capital U given by small u into capital V. And we know that the general expression for pressure exerted, since we don't know whether the radiation is incident normally or obliquely, so we have to consider oblique incidence for the general case, and we know that the pressure exerted is U by 3. All right. So we differentiate this relation here, U equal to UV, with keeping T constant. So we get del U del V T equal to small u. All right. So this basically, this term we are getting del u del v t equal to small u. So this term here, del u del v t in this relation is nothing but small u, and capital P we can replace by u by 3. Okay. So we differentiate with respect to t keeping v constant this relation, and we get del p del t v equal to 1/3 du dt, because u is a function of t only, so we do not do partial derivative here. So del p del t v equal to 1/3 du dt. Okay. So this term is obtained. This term here is obtained. So we get a value for del u del v t, and we get a value for del p del t v. Okay. And using these two, so I've given the arrows for you to understand which terms we are replacing by what. We write u equal to 1/3 t du dt minus u by 3. In place of p we write u by 3, and in place of t del p del t v we write 1/3 t du dt, and in place of del u del vt we write just u. So this entire equation becomes an equation in terms of small u and t. Okay. So what do we get here? U plus u by 3, that is 4u by 3 equal to t by 3 du dt, or du by u equal to 4 dt by t. Familiar looking equation, you know, you have to take log and integrate. Okay, so integrating we get log u equal to 4 log t plus log c, where log c is the constant of integration. Clear? Every step has been indicated, written down and explained, so I don't think there should be any problem. Even then, if you have any problem, as I told you in our group chat also, that the remaining unresponsive is not a solution. If you are facing any problem, if you are having any doubt, then you have to unmute yourself and tell me, because I cannot see you. This is almost, I mean, it is absolutely a one-sided conversation. I can't even call it a conversation. So it is a totally one-sided delivery, and it is very difficult for the teacher to, you know, do this job, because we are used to seeing your faces in class and understanding, figuring out whether you are understanding or not from your expressions. We can't do that here, and that is very disturbing. So if you remain unresponsive, then we will understand, I will understand that you have understood everything if you don't say anything. But if you unmute and tell me that, ma'am, please repeat this, I did not understand this step, then it becomes easier. The job, my job becomes easier. Anyway, so integrating, we get this. So obviously we can write this as log u equal to log t to the power 4 plus log c, which again is a constant. Okay, so we can write this as log u equal to log c t to the power 4. Nothing to explain there. And so since we have log on both sides, so we can take out the arguments and write u equal to c t to the power 4. All right. So the total rate of emission per unit area of the black body is E, which is proportional to U, which is, as we can see from this relation that we have just derived, is proportional to the 4th power of the absolute temperature of the body. So which of course you can understand that is Stefan's law. So E in turn is proportional to the 4th power of the temperature of the body, and in other words we can write E equal to sigma T to the power 4, because total rate of emission is dependent on the energy density U, and energy density, as we can see, is dependent on the 4th power of the absolute temperature. So the total rate of emission from the per unit area of the black body depends on the 4th power of the temperature, and so capital E is equal to sigma T to the power 4, which is Stefan's law. Okay, so this is how you can derive Stefan's law from purely thermodynamical considerations. Remember, Stefan's law was an experimental law. It was hypotheticated based on experimental results. But you can see now that it is an experimental law, but it can be proved analytically by using the help of thermodynamical relations. Okay, is this part clear to everybody? Can I move on? If you want, you can just go through the slide once and check if you've understood the steps.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now we will, so now that we know Stefan's law, which is a very crucial law for any, in general for black bodies, but if you insert the emittance factor in the expression of, in the equation of the law, then it is generalized for any kind of object. So that is one part that is taken care of for black bodies, the relation between the total emitted radiation and the temperature of the body. Now, how is the energy of black body radiation distributed? This is a very, very crucial part, and this is actually the part which will give us a few laws, but which will also lead to the failure of classical theory to explain black body radiation. Okay, so step by step, first we'll see what is the behavior of the energy distribution, and then we'll see how the laws that were designed classically to explain this energy distribution failed. So this is a typical arrangement. Just a second. So this is a typical arrangement to analyze the energy of black body radiation. This is an experiment done by Lumiere and Pringsheim, called Lumiere and Pringsheim's experiment. And you can see there is a prism. Okay, so this is a fluorospar prism, not the typical prism that we use in a laboratory. Okay, and just take a look at the diagram, just look at the different parts. Okay, have you gone through it? So see how the radiation from the electrically heated carbon tube is coming. It's getting reflected by a concave mirror, first concave mirror, passed through a prism, reflected by a second concave mirror, and then there is another slit through which it goes to something called the bolometer. I know the figure is not very clear, but I mean, once I share this file with you, you can zoom in and see properly when I share the PDF. Okay, so bolometer is basically an apparatus to analyze spectral energy density. Okay, so electrically heated carbon tube means that is acting as the black body. And this figure is taken from the internet. All right, so so this is to the bolometer, and from the using the data from the bolometer, the graph is drawn. So this is the typical graph, and I'm sure you have come across this graph when you are doing quantum theory in your first, I think, second semester or third semester. I think third semester, when I did quantum mechanics, but someone else did the quantum theory part with me. Okay, so you can see that the power radiated is plotted with wavelength. All right, so this is increasing wavelength and this is the power radiated, and you can see that this value here, the power radiated, or you can call it the energy, the emitted energy, the total value when it is plotted against wavelength, it starts from minimum, reaches a maximum, but it does not keep increasing. It starts decreasing as wavelength increases. And the value of this maximum, what should I say, the maximum power radiated at a given temperature, this value increases with temperature. So you can see that in this case here, in Lumiere and Pringsheim's experiment, at 1250 K, this is the peak. It's a pretty flat curve, changing with wavelength, not a very highly peaked curve, but the peak gradually gets more prominent as you go to higher temperatures. And see, at 2000 K, we have a very dominating peak and very sharp falls from the peak value as you move either to lower wavelengths or to higher wavelengths. Okay, and these peak values, when joined, we get another continuous curve, this red dashed curve. Okay, so this is the observation. Now obviously when you have an observation, experimental observation, the next job is to draw the inference, to explain the observation, to explain the curve and draw a conclusion from that curve. Okay? So what are the observations? I have just noted down the observations for you to see. First of all, at a given temperature, the energy is not distributed evenly throughout the radiation spectrum. If you are working at a particular temperature, you can see that the energy distribution is not even. It is minimum, reaches a maximum, and then again goes to a minimum as you move to higher wavelengths. Okay. At a given temperature, the intensity increases with increasing wavelength, becomes a maximum at a particular wavelength that we call lambda n, here lambda n, and beyond which it decreases again. With increasing temperature, the value of lambda m decreases so that lambda m into t remains constant. This is something I missed telling you. So you can see that we can see that the peak value increases with increasing temperature. But at the same time, the value of lambda, the value of the wavelength at which the peak value is reached, shifts to a lower value. See, at 1250K, it's a little less than 3, whereas at 2000K, the value of lambda at which the peak is reached is less than 2. Okay, so the peak value increases with temperature, but the value of lambda at which the peak value is reached, that we call lambda n, is decreasing as we go to higher temperatures. Okay, just a second. Okay, so that the product of this value of wavelength lambda m, that is the value of wavelength at which the maximum value of power is reached, multiplied by the temperature, remains a constant. So lambda mt is a constant. This is the experimental observation. Okay, also energy emission increases with increasing temperature for all wavelengths, that we can see clearly. And the area under each curve gives the total energy emitted by the body. The area under each curve gives the total energy emitted by the body at that temperature for the range of wavelengths under consideration. Okay. Now, what is the value of this total energy emitted by the body at a particular temperature? This value is basically given by our Stefan's law that we just discussed, and we know from Stefan's law that this value should be the fourth power of temperature, and it is seen that if you calculate this area, then it is seen to vary as fourth power of the temperature, which verifies Stefan-Boltzmann's law. Okay, so these are the experimental observations, out of which two most important things are that lambda mt equal to constant. This is actually a law that we'll come across in a moment, and also the value of the area under consideration for a given curve for the given range of wavelengths. Actually, mathematically, it should give the total energy radiated, and theoretically that energy radiated should vary as T to the power 4 according to Stefan's law. And if you calculate the area for a given curve at a given temperature, then we will see that this value is actually proportional to the fourth power of that particular temperature. Okay. lambda mt equal to constant. This is something we will again. So this lambda mt equal to constant is basically known as a law called Wien's displacement law. This was given in 1893.
What year?
This was given in 1893 by a physicist called Wien. And this is again, as you can see, a law taken from experimental observation. And the value that the fact that the wavelength value at which maximum energy is obtained shifts to a lower value, that is why it is called the displacement law. Okay, keeping a product lambda mt equal to constant. Okay. This is Wien's displacement law, and this value of constant is a well calculated value experimentally, theoretically, and this comes out to be 0.2892 centimeter Kelvin. Now you get short sums. I think you have already done these short sums in that particular semester where you did quantum theory, where this displacement value is given and then you are asked to calculate the temperature of an object. For example, radiation coming from the sun, you just draw the graph, see the displacement value, and you can make an estimate of the temperature of the sun, etc., because the constant is known. Now, it is observed that as the temperature is increased, the emitted radiation contains an increased number of shorter wavelengths. The fact that the peak value shifts to a lower value of wavelength means it is moving to a shorter value. Lambda m becomes lesser, that is shorter wavelengths, and so more shorter wavelengths are contained in the emitted radiation. Okay, and as the temperature is raised, the maximum intensity of radiation is shifted or displaced towards shorter wavelengths. So it was also shown by Wien that Em, the maximum value of the energy radiated, is proportional to T to the power 5. Okay, so Em equal to constant into T to the power 5, or Em T to the power minus 5 equal to a constant. Okay, so E lambda is equal to C lambda to the power minus 5 and multiplied by a function of lambda t. So this E lambda is the emissive power of the black body, which has the maximum value at temperature T. And this assumption, this basically is a law given by Wien. This was shown by him. And the assumption that was made by Wien, it was an abrupt assumption that this function of the product lambda t is equal to, is of the form a e to the power minus small a by lambda t. This was an abrupt assumption made by Wien. Okay, so that we can write the emissive power E lambda equal to C lambda to the power minus 5 a e to the power minus small a by lambda t, so that E lambda equal to C and A are clubbed together to form the constant K, lambda to the power minus 5 e to the power minus A by lambda t. Okay, it was found that the value of K is 4.94 into 10 to the power 15 CGS units, and the value of this constant small a is 1.43 centimeter degree. Okay. So E lambda d lambda becomes K lambda to the power minus 5 e to the power minus A by lambda t d lambda, and this is equal to dE, which is the amount of energy in the spectral region lying within wavelengths lambda and lambda plus d lambda at a temperature T. Okay. So E lambda d lambda, which is denoted as d, is nothing but the energy in the spectral region lying within wavelengths lambda and lambda plus d lambda, but you must mention that it is at a given temperature T. Okay, so that now we can write this expression as dE equal to K lambda to the power minus 5 e to the power minus A by lambda t d lambda. This is known as Wien's law of energy distribution. So basically Wien gave us two laws. First, the experimental law, that is lambda mt equal to constant, and then from that by making a plausible, abrupt argument giving a particular form of the function f of lambda t, he gave us another expression for the energy density d for the spectral region lying between lambda and lambda plus d lambda at a given temperature T, and this is known as Wien's law of energy distribution. Okay. Now we must note that this law matches experimental curve only at shorter wavelengths and lower temperatures. Okay. So a lot of things were done, but finally it was seen that when this was when people were trying to match this function with the experimentally obtained curve, a matching was found only at shorter wavelengths and lower temperatures, but not for higher temperatures and longer wavelengths. And then came the famous Rayleigh-Jeans law. Okay, again, very celebrated law, very elaborately, an elaborate trial, I would say, to explain the energy density of black body radiation. But at the end, it was a failure because of obvious reasons that we know now, that classical concepts were used. But nevertheless, this is very important from the point of view of theory, because when Planck tried to rectify this law so that he could explain the energy distribution of black body radiation, he started off from Rayleigh-Jeans law, and then he used some rectification, which we'll do in our future classes. Then he used the rectification according to a new theory, that is quantum theory. But the starting point was Rayleigh-Jeans law, because his method was correct. Rayleigh-Jeans method was correct, Rayleigh and Jeans. Their method was correct, but their assumption of classical theory, using classical theory, that is where they went wrong. Okay. So this was again a theoretical attempt to fit the experimental curves as obtained by Lumiere and Prinction. So the experimental curves by Lumiere and Prinction, from there Wien gave the displacement law and tried to give an expression for the energy density which matched the curves at lower temperatures and shorter wavelengths. So the failure of Wien to explain the entire curve led again Rayleigh and Jeans, Lord Rayleigh. You studied Rayleigh's criteria of resolution. So same Lord Rayleigh and Jeans, they further wanted to theoretically establish an explanation for the experimentally obtained curve of Lumiere and Prinction. Now, what was the assumption? The assumption was that for electromagnetic radiation spectrum emitted by a black body, there is continuous variation with wavelength from 0 to infinity. This is a classical assumption. We all know that in electromagnetic theory, when we are doing wave theory of light or electromagnetic radiation, any wave, any wavelength, then we know that there is no restriction on the energy value. Energy depends on amplitude of the wave, and amplitude can have any value. There is no restriction whatsoever. Okay, so that was the same assumption made by them, that there is continuous variation of wavelength from 0 to infinity. What is the law? The law of energy distribution given by Rayleigh and Jeans is something like this: E lambda d lambda equal to 8 pi kt by lambda to the power 4 d lambda. So Wien's law, the energy distribution law given by Wien, he, that gave this E lambda d lambda proportional to lambda to the power minus 5, but Rayleigh and Jeans' law gave E lambda d lambda proportional to lambda to the power minus 4. This is a major difference between the two laws. two theoretical laws trying to explain black body spectral distribution. So here K is the Boltzmann constant, and we will go through a derivation of this law. So for this derivation, now this for this derivation, please follow I have given all the steps, I've mentioned all the steps one by one. Please follow them, try to follow them carefully. So, just a second. Okay. So for this derivation, we consider a cubical cavity of side A, cubical cavity, okay, not a spherical cavity, cubical cavity of side A with metallic walls, and the metallic walls are uniformly heated to a temperature capital T, so that they emit electromagnetic radiation in the thermal range of frequencies. We are considering radiation pressure, thermal radiation, so this is what is the first assumption. Now, from classical electromagnetic theory, radiation inside the cavity must exist in the form of standing waves with nodes on the walls. This also you all have done, I think, in your when you did quantum theory. Okay, remember the inside the cavity, the okay, let's go back to this. Let's go back to this black body picture. Yes. Okay, so see, radiation is incident, and then here the radiation gets reflected from the walls, from all the walls inside this cavity, and therefore obviously they get reflected and they fall back on one another, so that inside this cavity what is formed are a set of standing waves. Each wave, electromagnetic wave, it gets reflected from the opposite wall, and if you consider a cube, this is a sphere, if you consider a cube, then the wave that enters, that falls back, reflects and falls back upon itself, and this goes on, and we get a set of standing waves. Okay, so which is why it was assumed that inside the cavity, the cubical cavity, radiations must exist in the form of standing or stationary waves with nodes at the wall. So two obvious positions of nodes for these standing waves are the walls. So any of these standing waves would at least have two nodes. So the simplest mode of vibration would have two nodes at the two walls and one antinode in between. Okay, so this is a cubical cavity. Why have we taken cubical cavity? So that we have mutually independent components. The moment you take a cubical cavity, you have the coordinate axis x, y, z, which are mutually independent, perpendicular to each other, therefore mutually independent, and therefore you can deal with the individual components separately. If you take a spherical cavity, then you cannot do this because they are not independent of each other. Okay, so this is one reason why a cubical cavity is considered. So for the x component, the standing wave, the lowest mode of the standing wave would have nodes at x equal to 0 and x equal to a. A is the dimension of the cavity. The y component will have nodes at y equal to 0 and y equal to a, and the z component will have nodes at z equal to 0 and z equal to a. Okay, so these conditions restrict the possible wavelengths and frequencies inside the cavity. The moment you have the positions of two nodes and therefore at least one antinode in between fixed, that will restrict the moment you have this, you cannot have an infinite range of wavelengths and an infinite range of frequencies, because the mode, the fundamental mode is definitely having two nodes and one antinode, and that will restrict the possible wavelengths and frequencies inside the cavity. Okay. So our next task is to count the number of standing waves with nodes on the walls having wavelengths lying in the interval lambda and lambda plus d lambda corresponding to the frequency range nu to nu plus d nu. Okay. So once we have identified the fundamental modes of vibration, our next job is to count, basically count the number of standing waves which are having nodes on the walls and having a wavelength interval lambda and lambda plus d lambda corresponding to the frequency range, because frequency is also restricted. So frequency range is nu to nu plus d. Okay. Now the mathematical form of the one-dimensional electromagnetic standing wave, if you consider the electric field part, is this. Again, something you need to identify from your previous semester's work. Okay. Ext equal to E naught sine 2 pi x by lambda sine 2 pi nu. This is a typical form of a standing wave. So this is the space part and this is the time part, and as you can see that this is not a progressive wave, this is a standing wave. Yes, any question? Any question? Someone is unmuted. Do you want to ask a question? Now, as you can see that amplitude of this standing wave is 0 for all positions satisfying 2x by lambda equal to 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. And considering the x direction alone, the two fixed position of nodes are at x equal to 0 and x equal to a. So we must take 2x by lambda equal to n for x equal to a, so that n equal to 1, 2, 3, etc. This is for satisfying the conditions that are already prevailing. Okay. Now this gives a set of allowed values for lambda and also the different modes of vibration. So from this, for n equal to 1, x equal to lambda by 2, for n equal to 2, x equal to lambda, for n equal to 3, x equal to 3 lambda by 2, etc. So this gives us the modes of vibration and the allowed values of lambda. So the allowed frequencies are given by mu equal to c by lambda, where lambda equal to 2a by n from this expression. Okay. So we get the allowed values of frequency and wavelength. Now suppose n mu d mu be the number of allowed values in the range nu and nu plus d mu. Okay, we arbitrarily assume that n mu d mu is the number of allowed values in the range of frequencies nu to nu plus d mu. So obviously n nu d nu should be equal to 2a by c d nu from this relation over here. N nu d nu should be equal to 2a by c, right? See, from here nu and lambda, they are related like this. And this must be multiplied by 2 because there are two independent waves corresponding to two states of polarization of electromagnetic waves. Just because we are considering electromagnetic waves, for any particular given wave, there can be two independent states of polarization. You always know that, okay? Clockwise and anti-clockwise. So we have to multiply each mode by 2 for considering the two independent modes of polarization. So at once n nu d nu becomes 4a by c d nu. Okay. So this is the number of allowed standing waves for a one-dimensional cavity. Okay. The number of allowed standing waves for a one-dimensional cavity when we are considering the x direction alone for a frequency range nu to nu plus d nu which will satisfy the conditions of that particular cavity, you know, having nodes at x equal to 0 and x equal to a, is this. Now for obtaining this expression, for this was for just considering just the expression. Now for obtaining this expression for a three-dimensional cavity, we have to consider an array of integral values nx, ny, nz. Earlier we considered only n for the x direction. For all three directions to be considered, we have to consider an array of nx, ny, nz. So these are the number of points lying between the shells of radii of frequency values mu and mu plus d mu. Okay. Now it can be shown, I will not do the detailed derivation over here, but just note that it can be shown that n mu d mu equal to, I will do the detailed derivation when we do Planck's law. Okay. For now, just note that n mu d mu can be shown to be equal to 8 pi a cube by c cube mu square d mu. Okay. Now to evaluate the average energy of these standing waves, Rayleigh and Jeans use the law of equipartition of energy. We know that all classical particles, they follow the law of equipartition of energy law. Okay. So Rayleigh and Jeans use the law of equipartition of energy to find the average energy of these standing waves. And we know that the average kinetic energy per degree of freedom is kT by 2 half kT. So for sinusoidal standing waves, which you know you have to multiply it by 2 for the two possible states, this value becomes half kT into 2, so kT. So it must be, you must keep this in mind, that it is assumed that the average total energy has the same value for all standing waves in the cavity, irrespective of their frequencies. So the energy per unit volume in the frequency interval mu and mu plus d mu for a cavity at temperature T is just the average energy multiplied by the number of standing waves and obviously divided by the volume of the cavity. So you have to multiply this value, the average energy, with the number of standing waves in that frequency range. Okay? So that we get E mu d mu equal to 8 pi kT by c cube into mu square d mu. How do we get this? We multiply n mu d mu with kT, so that we get 8 pi a cube kT by c cube into mu square d mu, and then we divide by the volume, where a cube is the volume. A is the side of the cube, so a cube is the volume. So dividing by volume, we get the value of the energy per unit volume to be 8 pi kT by c cube mu square d mu. Okay. This is Rayleigh-Jeans formula for black body radiation in terms of frequency. Okay. Again, this theoretical expression matches experimental curve only at longer wavelengths and higher temperatures, but fails at shorter wavelengths. So exactly opposite of what Wien obtained. Wien's formula showed that it matched the experimental formula for short wavelengths and low temperatures, whereas Rayleigh-Jeans formula matched the experimental curve for longer wavelengths at higher temperatures. Okay? So we must come to something in between the two, which will match at all temperatures. So a comparative discussion on the experimental and theoretical plots. You see, this is the spectral radiance versus frequency. It will be just the opposite of wavelength. If wavelength shifts to lower values for getting the maximum value of energy, the frequency will shift to higher values, because frequency and wavelength are inversely related. This is the wavelength graph, just opposite. Okay, and this is something that I find that you make mistakes a lot. When you are asked to draw a black body radiation curve, please see whether you have been asked to draw the curve with respect to wavelength or frequency. They are totally opposite. And when I was checking your copies for this quantum theory portion in your third sem, I saw that many of you don't understand this difference. I don't remember exactly what you were asked to draw, but I clearly remember that you don't understand the difference of the behavior of this of this energy radiation density for drawing it versus frequency and drawing it versus wavelength. It's totally different because wavelength and frequency are inversely related. So writing the variation with respect to drawing the variation with respect to wavelength and writing frequency, or the other way around, that was very common in the answer script. So please, if you don't understand this, let me know. I'll explain once more, but please try to note that they are very different. You have to figure out what you are being asked to draw. Okay. See, I've also highlighted that this is frequency and this is wavelength. And this red curve gives Wien's displacement law. So this is Wien's displacement distribution law. This is Planck's law. Wien's distribution law fails at large wavelengths. Planck's law fails at short wavelengths. Okay. Sorry, Rayleigh-Jean's law. This is Rayleigh-Jean's law. So Rayleigh-Jean's law is failing at short wavelengths. Wien's distribution law is failing at long wavelengths. And this solid curve here is the experimental curve. So we see that Rayleigh-Jean's law, which has energy density continuously increasing with increasing frequency, fails at shorter wavelengths. And also at any given temperature, the total energy that should be given by the area under the curve, from Rayleigh-Jean's law, if you integrate it, it comes to infinity. Okay. So once again, I have given a comparative picture of Rayleigh-Jean's, experimental and Wien's law against frequency. Okay. So this is what happens. This is the classical theory. This is the classical theory, and you can see that when you come to lower wavelengths, it basically diverges. Okay. So instead of coming down, it goes to infinite values, it diverges. And this is exactly what is called the ultraviolet catastrophe. Okay. So Rayleigh-Jean's law ideally seems logical when you go through the discussion, but you can see that when you come to shorter wavelengths, instead of the energy value becoming lower, it goes to infinite values, and which is absurd. The theoretical prediction is absurd. Not only that it does not match with experimental curves, but it is also an absurd prediction. Also, the total energy value goes to infinity, which is also absurd. And this phenomena, this absurd result of Rayleigh-Jean's law is known as ultraviolet catastrophe. Okay, because in the ultraviolet region, it is a catastrophe that is occurring. The value of energy is going to infinity, which is catastrophic in nature. Okay, so this is the failure of classical physics, and I'll end today. So in our next class, we will see how Planck rectified this absurd result. And when I'll be doing that, I'll be just recapping a bit of these last two slides, not the explanation, not the derivation of Rayleigh-Jean's law, but just the comparative study of the classical laws with the experimental laws, and then we'll move over to Planck's law. Okay.